This is Tom Fox. I think everyone knows of my love for classic monster movies. I've blogged about them, I have podcast about them, I've talked about them, and I've decided for the month of October, I'm going to mine great monsters, great mad scientists, and some of these creations for leadership lessons for compliance practitioners. So over the month of October on Popcorn and Compliance, I'm going to feature some of the lesser known movies from the classic movie monster era of Universal Pictures, 1931 to the mid-1940s. I hope you will enjoy this series. I hope you'll enjoy my love of classic monster movies, and I hope you'll listen to Popcorn and Compliance. In this episode, we conclude our three-part exploration of Edgar Allan Poe-themed movies from Universal in the 30s. 1935's The Raven, starring Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, billed as having been suggested by Edgar Allan's poem of the same name. It is adapted from an original screenplay by David Bohm. Lugosi stars as a neurosurgeon obsessed with Poe, who has a torture chamber in his basement, and Karloff plays an escaped murderer on the run from the police, whom Lugosi manipulates into doing his dirty work. After Jean Thatcher, a young dancer, is injured in a car accident, her father, Judge Thatcher, and fiancé implore neurosurgeon Dr. Richard Volin to come out of retirement and perform a delicate operation on her cranial nerves. Volin reluctantly agrees to come out, but he is insensitive to human suffering. Nevertheless, eventually he does do so. A month after the operation, Jean is recovered, and Volin has become obsessed with her. She is grateful to him for healing her, as well as making Jerry his assistant. Jerry is her fiancé. But when Volin tells her during a checkup in the living room that he hired Jerry to give him something to take the place of what he is losing, she avoids his embrace and gives him an excuse of why she must go. Knowing Volin to be a devotee of Poe, Jean surprises him by performing a solo dance recitation of The Raven. Judge Thatcher suspects Jean may be falling for Volin, so he visits the doctor to tell him to be careful and not to lead her on. When it becomes clear that Volin is already in love with Jean, the judge tells Volin not to see his daughter again, and that she will marry Jerry, who is much closer to his age. Volin responds that his longing for Jean is distracting him from important work, so Judge Thatcher must send her to him, but the judge leaves. A man comes to town asking Volin for a new face. Volin recognizes him as Edward Bateman, a bank robber who is on the run after killing two guards escaping from San Quentin, and he says he will help in exchange for a favor that involves torture and murder. But Bateman replies he no longer wishes a life of violence and only ended up on the path after being called ugly his whole life. Volin agrees to improve Bateman's appearance, but instead disfigures him by damaging half his face. Bateman reluctantly submits to Volin so the doctor will undo the procedure. Against Judge Thatcher's will, Jerry persuades Jean to accept an invitation to spend a weekend at Volin's with some other guests. Everyone feels uncomfortable about Bateman, who is now Volin's butler. But Volin says he was tortured by Arabs during the war, and Jean apologizes to him for having been frightened from his appearance, unknowingly endearing herself to him. The judge wants to leave as the guests are going to sleep, but Jerry and Joan laugh off his concerns about Volin. Around 11, Bateman takes Judge Thatcher from his room. Jerry hears the judge's muffled cries and tries to help, but Bateman knocks him out and brings the judge to Volin's cellar, where Volin has built and collected multiple torture devices, including several inspired by Poe. The judge is strapped to a slab with a blade that will take 15 minutes to reach him, and Volin flips a switch to lower Jean's room down to the cellar. Regaining consciousness, Jerry tries to call the police, but Volin has disconnected the phone and drops steel shutters to trap everyone in the house. Volin then leads Jerry to the cellar and at gunpoint forces he and Jean into a room. When Bateman learns that inside the walls are closing in and Jean will soon be crushed, He opens the door, and Volan shoots him as the couple escapes. Bateman tackles Volan, knocking him out, and drags the doctor to the shrinking room, closing the door and starting the walls with the last of his strength. After Judge Thatcher is freed, the guests, thankful to Bateman for his sacrifice, all go home. So I thought I would mine this movie for some ethical and leadership lessons. So what are some of the ethical lessons from this movie? Number one, the consequences of obsession. Dr. Richard Volan, played by Bela Lugosi, becomes obsessed with a young woman, Jean Thatcher, to the point of madness. His obsession leads him to commit unethical, criminal, and indeed horrific acts. The film serves as a cautionary tale about the destructive nature of obsession and the harm it can cause oneself and others. Number two, the ethical dilemma of retribution. Dr. Volan's desire for revenge against Jean's father, Judge Thatcher, who caused him physical harm, raises ethical questions about the justification of seeking retribution. The film prompts viewers to consider the ethics of revenge and whether it can ever be morally justified. Number three, ethical responsibilities of medical professionals. Dr. Volan is a renowned surgeon, and his actions in the film include the involvement in illegal surgeries and raise questions about the ethical responsibilities of medical professionals, and indeed the entire Hippocratic Oath. It highlights the importance of upholding ethical standards and prioritizing patient well-being over personal desires, obviously still true today. Number four, the danger of manipulation. Dr. Volan uses his knowledge and influence to manipulate others, leading them to commit unethical acts. This underscores the ethical lesson that manipulation and coercion are harmful and should be avoided at all costs. Number five, the power of forgiveness. This film touches on the theme of forgiveness, particularly in the relationship between Dr. Volan and Judge Thatcher. Forgiveness can be a powerful ethical principle, allowing individuals to move past grievances and seek reconciliation. Number six, the ethics of consent. This film involves situations where characters are subjected to medical procedures without their informed consent. This raises important ethical concerns about the necessity of informed consent and respecting individuals' autonomies over their bodies. How does that sound like today? The corruption of power. Dr. Volan's position as a respected surgeon gives him power and influence, but he becomes corrupted by this power, using it for his own twisted purposes. The film serves as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and the importance of ethical conduct, especially those in positions of authority. Number eight, the value of empathy and compassion. The film highlights the absence of empathy and compassion in Dr. Volan's characters, leading to tragic consequences. Ethical leaders who individuals should prioritize empathy and compassion in their interactions with others. How about some of the leadership lessons? Although this is a dark and twisted film, there are some interesting insights into leadership. Number one, charisma alone is not enough. The character played by Bela Lugosi, Dr. Volan, is a charismatic character. However, his charisma is coupled with a twisted sense of ethics and obsession. This highlights the lesson that charisma alone does not make a good leader. Effective leadership also requires ethical principles and a sense of responsibility. Number two, the dangers of unchecked power. Dr. Volan's character becomes increasingly corrupted as he gains more power and control over others. It illustrates the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of ethical checks and balances to prevent the abuse of power. Number three, the responsibility of mentorship. Dr. Volan serves as a mentor to the character of Edmund Bateman. This mentorship raises questions about the ethical responsibilities of leaders to guide and mentor their followers in a positive and ethical direction. Number four, ethical dilemmas in decision-making. The characters in the film are faced with moral dilemmas, such as whether to go along with Dr. Volan's unethical plans or resisting them. Ethical leaders should be capable of making ethical decisions, even in challenging situations, and then indeed inspiring others to do the same. Number five, the consequences of obsession. Dr. Volan's obsession with a particular surgical technique and his infatuation with Gene lead to dire consequences. Leaders must be mindful of the potential destructive effects of their work and personal obsessions and ensure their actions are guided by a broader ethical framework. Number 6, the importance of accountability. In the film, there's a lack of accountability for Dr. Volan's actions until it's too late. Effective leadership includes being accountable for one's decisions and actions, and the leader should be responsible for the consequences of their choices. Number 7, empathy and compassion. We explored that during the series on ethical lessons, but it also is true for leaders. Leaders who demonstrate empathy and compassion for others tend to foster healthier, more positive environments and indeed relationships. Number 8, ethics in the pursuit of excellence. Dr. Volan's pursuit of surgical excellence is an admirable one, but it becomes ethically problematic when it leads to harm. Leaders should uphold ethical standards even when striving for excellence in their fields. And finally, team dynamics. While not a central theme in the film, the interactions amongst the characters demonstrate the importance of effective team dynamics in any leadership setting. Leaders should promote collaboration, open communications, and mutual respect within their teams. It's important to note that The Raven is a horror film, but these ethical and leadership examples presented are largely negative and cautionary. However, they serve as reminders of the challenges leaders face, such as the temptation of power, the consequences of obsession, and the continuing need for ethical decision-making, even in the direst of consequences. This is Tom Fox. I hope you've enjoyed this short series of exploring the Edgar Allan Poe themed movies from the Universal Pictures classic monster movie decade of the 30s and early 40s. I hope you'll join us again next week, where we're going to go back to the basics and take a look at the first Universal monster movie from the 30s, Dracula. It's one of my favorites. It gives me an excuse to rewatch it, much to my wife's chagrin. I hope you'll join me next week on Popcorn and Compliance. Popcorn and Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.